Every civilization that ever rose to power left behind a record. Empires carved their victories into stone. Kings commissioned scribes to document their dynasties. Governments built archives, libraries, and databases to preserve the story of who they were and what they did. And for centuries, the modern world looked at the communities that did none of these things and drew a single, catastrophically arrogant conclusion. They had no history. No written language meant no record. No record meant no memory. No memory meant no civilization worth studying. This assumption shaped entire academic fields, justified colonial policies, and quietly erased thousands of years of human knowledge from the official story of our species. There is just one problem with that assumption. It is completely, demonstrably, and profoundly wrong. The Aboriginal Australians carry an oral and visual knowledge tradition that researchers now confirm stretches back over 65,000 years, making it the longest continuous recorded history of any human community on Earth. Not written. Not carved into stone, but encoded, with extraordinary precision, into song, ceremony, landscape, and symbol in ways that modern information scientists are only now beginning to fully understand. 65,000 years. For context, the entire recorded history of Western civilization covers approximately 5,000 years. The Aboriginal memory tradition is 13 times older than everything the modern world considers ancient. And it survived. Intact. Transmittable. Accurate enough that researchers have used Aboriginal songlines to locate geographical features, waterholes, rock formations, astronomical events that were last accessible during the last ice age. These were not stories. They were databases. Not written in ink. Written in memory, movement, melody, and meaning, encoded into systems so sophisticated that the information they carried has outlasted every library ever built and every empire that ever dismissed the people who built them. Here is the question that should genuinely unsettle you. If a civilization can preserve 65,000 years of precise, navigable, scientifically verifiable history without a single written word, what exactly does writing give us that we didn't already have? And what did we lose when we decided that the only knowledge worth keeping was the kind you could put on a page? By the end of this, you will never look at a story, a song, or a symbol the same way again. To understand how tribes coded their history without writing, you first need to understand something that modern information theory has only recently begun to formally recognize. Writing is not the only way to store information. It is simply the most recent. And in the long arc of human history, it is, by a significant margin, the least tested. The written word has existed for approximately 5,000 years. The human brain's capacity for oral memory, spatial navigation, musical encoding, and symbolic pattern recognition has existed for at least 200,000. For the overwhelming majority of human existence on this planet, knowledge was not stored on surfaces. It was stored in systems, living, breathing, socially maintained systems of extraordinary sophistication that modern information scientists are now studying with the same seriousness once reserved exclusively for written archives. And what they are finding is not primitive. It is not simple. It is, in many measurable respects, superior. Consider the Aboriginal Australian songline tradition, perhaps the most studied and most remarkable non-written knowledge system ever documented. A songline is simultaneously a song, a map, a historical record, a navigational instrument, and a legal document. It describes a specific route across the landscape, sometimes spanning thousands of kilometers, encoding the location of water sources, food resources, sacred sites, territorial boundaries, and astronomical markers into a melody that follows the precise contours of the terrain it describes. The song and the land are the same document. To sing the song correctly is to navigate the landscape accurately. To learn the song is to inherit the map. To teach the song is to transfer the entire accumulated geographical, historical, and legal knowledge of a territory to the next generation, without a single written character and without a single error that 65,000 years of continuous verification has not corrected. Researchers from the fields of both musicology and cognitive neuroscience have identified why this system works with such extraordinary durability. Music activates more simultaneous regions of the human brain than almost any other cognitive activity. Melody, rhythm, and spatial memory are processed through overlapping neural networks, meaning that information encoded musically is stored with a redundancy that purely verbal or visual memory cannot match. The Aboriginal communities did not know the neuroscience. but they built a knowledge system perfectly calibrated to exploit it, refined over thousands of generations of lived experience with what works and what is lost. Then there is the West African Griot tradition, hereditary oral historians whose role in their communities was not ceremonial but functional. A Griot was a living archive. Trained from childhood in the memorization of genealogies, historical events, legal precedents, agricultural knowledge, and diplomatic records stretching back dozens of generations. Their memory was not personal. It was communal property, maintained, verified, and corrected by a network of other griots across a region, cross-referencing each other's accounts the way a distributed database cross-references its nodes. This was not one person remembering things. This was an information network, with redundancy, verification protocols, and transmission standards, built entirely from human memory and social structure. And it worked. For centuries. But here is where the story takes a turn that no academic textbook has ever been fully comfortable presenting. Because once you understand how these knowledge systems worked, you are forced to confront a question that cuts directly to the heart of everything the modern world believes about progress, civilization, and the hierarchy of human intelligence. What if these systems weren't just equal to writing? What if, for specific purposes, they were better? Not as a romantic notion. Not as cultural relativism. But as a measurable, documented, scientifically verifiable claim. Let's start with memory capacity. The average trained Griot could accurately recall and recite genealogies spanning 30 to 40 generations, approximately 800 to 1,000 years of family and political history, with a precision that researchers verified by cross-referencing multiple Griot accounts against each other and against available archaeological and documentary evidence. The error rate was extraordinarily low. Lower, in several documented cases, than the error rate found in written historical records from the same periods and regions. Written records, it turns out, are copied by humans. Copying introduces errors. Errors compound across generations of copying. The Griot network, with its distributed verification system, had a built-in error correction mechanism that manuscript traditions frequently lacked. The living archive was, in measurable terms, more accurate than the written one. Then there is the question of accessibility. A written record requires literacy to access. Literacy requires education. Education requires infrastructure. Infrastructure requires resources. At every step of this chain, knowledge becomes the property of a smaller and smaller group of people, until, historically, it becomes the exclusive possession of a tiny educated elite while the vast majority of the population remains locked out of the record entirely. An oral tradition requires none of this infrastructure. Every member of the community is a potential carrier. Every ceremony is a transmission event. Every conversation between elder and child is a backup operation, copying critical data into a new biological storage system that will carry it forward for another generation. The knowledge belonged to everyone. Always. By design. And then there is the extraordinary case of the Aboriginal astronomical record. Researchers studying Aboriginal oral traditions have identified precise, verifiable descriptions of astronomical events, including a description of the Eta Carinii stellar outburst that occurred in 1843, a meteor impact, and most remarkably, accurate descriptions of sea level changes and coastal geography that correspond to conditions that last existed 10,000 years ago, during the end of the last ice age. 10,000 years of accurate astronomical and geographical memory. Transmitted without telescopes, without observatories, without written star charts, encoded into ceremony, story, and song, and carried forward with sufficient precision that 21st century researchers could verify the encoded observations against modern astrophysical and geological data. The conflict at the heart of this story is not between writing and oral tradition. It is between recognition and erasure. These systems were not discovered to be sophisticated recently. They were always sophisticated. They were simply never looked at by a civilization so convinced of its own informational superiority that it systematically destroyed what it refused to understand. And in that destruction, we lost things that no amount of archaeology, no depth of archival research, and no sophistication of modern technology can fully recover. But let's go deeper. Because the destruction of these knowledge systems is only half the story. The other half, the half that changes everything, is what happened when researchers, linguists, cognitive scientists, and information theorists began studying what survived. And what they found was not the remnant of a primitive system struggling toward literacy. It was the evidence of a design. A deliberate, sophisticated, multi-layered information architecture built not by accident or tradition alone, but by communities that understood, with profound clarity, the fundamental challenge of human knowledge transmission. How do you make certain that what you know today will still be known, accurately, completely, and usably, 1,000 years from now? Written civilizations answered this question with paper, stone, and ink, and lost enormous portions of their record to fire, flood, conquest, and decay. The Library of Alexandria. The Mayan codices burned by colonial administrators. The vast Persian literary tradition disrupted by invasion. The irreplaceable Irish monastic records destroyed in repeated raids. Centralized written archives are, by their physical nature, vulnerable to single points of failure. The oral and symbolic knowledge systems of tribal communities were engineered, whether consciously or through the ruthless selection pressure of survival, to have no single point of failure. Consider the specific architecture of the Aboriginal songline system in greater technical detail. A single songline is not owned by one person. It is distributed across an entire community, with different individuals responsible for different segments of the route. No single person carries the complete song. The complete song exists only when the community assembles. This is not a limitation of the system. It is its greatest strength. To destroy the songline, you would need to destroy every person who carries every segment simultaneously. You would need to erase an entire community's memory in a single moment. Even the most catastrophic colonial disruptions, as devastating as they were, rarely achieved this completely. Fragments survived. Carriers survived. And from surviving fragments, communities have been reconstructing and reactivating songlines that were disrupted for generations, because the land itself, unchanged, still holds the physical reference that the song describes. The backup was always the landscape. Then there is the extraordinary sophistication of the memory palace technique, known to modern cognitive scientists as the method of Lockheed, which tribal knowledge traditions employed at a scale and complexity that far exceeds any individual application of the technique documented in Western history. The method of Lockheed works by associating information with specific physical locations along a familiar route, allowing the memory to navigate the route spatially and retrieve the associated information at each location. Modern memory champions use this technique to memorize thousands of random digits in competition settings. Aboriginal communities used it to memorize 65,000 years of history across thousands of kilometers of terrain. The entire continent was the memory palace. Every rock formation, every waterhole, every seasonal landmark was simultaneously a physical location and an information node, carrying encoded historical, navigational, legal, and astronomical data that could be retrieved by anyone trained to read the landscape as the document it was. This is not metaphor. This is information architecture. And when the Andean Quipu system is examined with the same technical attention, the sophistication deepens further still. Recent computational analysis of surviving Quipus has revealed encoding systems of extraordinary complexity, hierarchical data structures, positional notation, color-coded categorical systems, and what appear to be narrative sequences encoded in the spatial relationships between chord clusters. The Quipu was not a simple tally system. It was a relational database, storing not just numbers but the relationships between numbers, not just events but the relationships between events, in a physical, tactile, three-dimensional medium that required no light to read and no surface to write on. You could read the entire history of a civilization in the dark, with your hands. Here is the twist. And it does not arrive with drama. It arrives with the quiet, irreversible weight of something that was always true, that simply waited for the right moment to be fully seen. The communities that coded their history without writing were not working around a limitation. They were working with an advantage. And the modern world, after 5,000 years of building libraries, printing presses, digital servers, and cloud storage systems, is only now, through the combined efforts of cognitive neuroscience, information theory, computational linguistics, and environmental psychology, beginning to formally understand what that advantage actually was. Here it is. Written knowledge is extractable. It can be removed from its community, its context, its living network of meaning, and still exist as an object. A book survives the death of its author. A document outlasts its writer. This feels like strength. And in certain ways it is. But extractability has a shadow side that tribal knowledge traditions understood instinctively and protected against with extraordinary sophistication. Knowledge separated from its community loses its meaning faster than it loses its form. A Quipu in a museum display case still exists as an object. But the knowledge it contains is no longer accessible, because the reading system, the trained hands, the living tradition of interpretation that gave the knots their meaning, was disrupted before it could be fully documented. The archive survived. The operating system did not. This is not unique to the Quipu. It is the fundamental vulnerability of every written knowledge system ever built. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived 2,000 years. But the communities that wrote them, and the full living context that made their meaning complete, did not survive with them. We have the text. We reconstruct the meaning. We are always, with written records, working from the object toward the intention, and the gap between them is where history is permanently lost. Tribal oral and symbolic knowledge traditions solved this problem by refusing to separate the knowledge from the community that held it. The knowledge was the community. The community was the knowledge. Destroy one, and yes, the other is damaged. But as long as any part of the community survives, as long as a single elder carries a single segment of the songline, as long as a single Griot remembers the opening verses of a genealogy, as long as a single Quipu master can feel the first knot of the first chord, the system can rebuild. Because the design was never about the object. It was about the relationship. And here is what this means for the world we live in right now. We are building the largest knowledge archive in human history. The Internet. Digital databases. Cloud storage. Artificial intelligence trained on billions of documents. We are producing more recorded information in a single year than all previous human history combined. And almost none of it is embedded in community. Almost none of it is encoded in relationship. Almost none of it is designed to be carried, in the deep, embodied, socially maintained way that tribal knowledge traditions carried their histories across tens of thousands of years. We have more information than any civilization that ever existed. And some of the loneliest, most contextually adrift, most historically disconnected people in human history are the ones producing it. The tribes that coded their history without writing understood something that our information-saturated world has almost completely forgotten. Knowledge that is not held in relationship is not really held at all. It is only stored. And storage, without the living community to give it meaning, is just delay before loss. So here is the question this entire journey leaves you with. What knowledge are you carrying? What are you transmitting? And to whom? Not what is saved on your phone. Not what exists in your cloud backup. But what lives in you, in your body, your memory, your relationships, that would be lost if the servers went dark tonight. The tribes coded 65,000 years of history in the most durable storage medium ever discovered. Each other. If this changed how you think about knowledge, memory, history, and what it actually means to preserve something, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us, what piece of knowledge from your own family or community do you carry that exists nowhere else? And if you want to keep uncovering the intelligence that the modern world forgot to study, subscribe. Because the most important archives were never in any library.